There is a weight in the air that was not there before, a shift in the atmosphere of your days that you cannot quite name but cannot quite ignore either. Something has changed in the invisible architecture of the connection between you and this person, something that has been building in the dark, beneath the surface of silence and distance, gathering force like a river pressing against a dam that was never built to hold forever. And if you have felt it, that strange heaviness in your chest at unexpected hours, that inexplicable pull toward your phone without knowing why, that sudden flood of memory arriving uninvited in the middle of an ordinary afternoon, you are not imagining it. You are sensing something real, something that exists not in the territory of wishful thinking, but in the actual energetic field between two people who have not finished their story yet, regardless of what the surface silence would have you believe. Jordan Peterson once said that the purpose of life is finding the largest burden you can bear and bearing it. And this person has been carrying the burden of your absence with a weight they did not anticipate, did not prepare for, and do not yet know how to set down. They thought distance would be the answer. They thought that if they simply removed themselves from the equation would eventually balance itself out without them. They were wrong, and the wrongness of that assumption has been pressing down on them with every passing day, growing heavier, not lighter, more undeniable, not less, until the weight of pretending they are fine has become more exhausting than the weight of admitting that they are not. The wall they built between you was never made of indifference. It was made of fear. And there is a crucial difference between those two materials that most people never stop to examine. Indifference is weightless. It costs nothing to maintain because it requires nothing from you. But fear is expensive. Fear demands constant upkeep. Fear requires you to be vigilant, to stay busy enough that the truth cannot catch you in a quiet moment, to keep moving fast enough that the grief of what you chose to walk away from cannot find your feet and root you to the spot. And this person has been running that exhausting race for months now, and they are tired, and the finish line keeps moving, and somewhere in the accumulated fatigue of all that desperate motion, the truth has finally caught up with them. Right, I feel. This in the comments if you know exactly what this kind of running costs. They wake up and you are already there, not as an intrusive thought they can dismiss with a swipe of conscious will, not as a ghost they can rationalize away with the right sequence of logical arguments, but as a presence that feels more real in those first unguarded moments of morning than anything else in the waking world around them. The coffee they make, without thinking. The silence across the table that has your shape in it. The joke they hear that lands differently because you are not there to receive it. The news they encounter that they want to share with someone who is no longer in their life in the way they need. All of it arriving in small, relentless waves that are wearing down the shore of their certainty, eroding the conviction that they made the right choice, that the distance was necessary, that the silence was wisdom rather than cowardice wearing wisdom's clothing. Peterson wrote that you cannot think your way out of a problem you behaved your way into, and this person behaved their way into the loneliness they are now living inside. Every choice they made to stay silent when they should have spoken, to leave when they should have stayed, to protect themselves when they should have been brave, those choices accumulated into the architecture of a life that looks fine from the outside, but feels hollow from within. And hollowness, real hollowness, is not something you can furnish your way out of. You cannot fill it with distraction or professional achievement or the company of people who do not reach the part of you that needs reaching. And they have tried. They have genuinely, desperately tried. And the hollow remains, because the hollow is shaped exactly like you and nothing else fits inside it. Because you were not just a person to them. You were an orientation. You were the direction that certain parts of them faced when they wanted to feel like themselves. You were the specific frequency at which something in them resonated that does not resonate at any other frequency they have found since. And without that orientation, they have been moving through their days like a compass that has lost its north, technically functional, technically fine, showing up to the obligations and performances of their daily life with enough skill that no one outside can see the difference, but without the one thing that made the function meaningful, without the thing that made the showing up feel like it was for something rather than simply because the day demanded it. There is a theater inside them that no one else is permitted to enter, a private space where the performance they maintain for the rest of the world is finally allowed to drop, where the carefully assembled version of themselves that says, "I am doing well, I made the right choice, I am moving forward," where that version finally exhausts itself and sits down in the dark and tells the truth. And the truth That gets told in that private theater, night after night, is the same truth it has always been, that they think about you constantly, that they replay specific moments between you with a vividness that suggests the mind is trying to hold on to something it knows it should not have let go of, that every person they have encountered since you has been measured against a standard you set, often without their awareness, and has been found to fall short in ways they cannot always articulate but always feel. This is what Peterson means when he talks about the danger of avoiding what needs to be confronted. The thing you refuse to face does not disappear, it goes underground. It operates from beneath the level of conscious awareness, shaping your choices and your emotional responses, and your capacity for genuine connection in ways you cannot see or understand or correct, precisely because you have refused to look at them directly. This person refused to look at what you meant to them, refused to admit, even to themselves, the full weight of what they were choosing to walk away from. And the refusal did not protect them, it simply deferred the reckoning into a future they could not outrun forever. That future is now. The reckoning has arrived, and it is arriving not as punishment but as invitation, the universe's insistence that they stop performing their way through a life that is missing its center and finally do something about the missing. Right, I know this feeling in the comments. If you have ever watched someone refuse to face what was right in front of them, something cracked in them recently. Not broke, cracked. There is a difference that matters enormously, and that most people collapse in their language because the distinction requires a kind of careful attention that pain does not always permit. Breaking is destruction. It is the end of a thing's structural integrity, the point at which it can no longer hold what it was built to hold. But cracking is the necessary fracture through which light begins to enter, the opening in the shell that precedes emergence, the fault line along which transformation becomes possible precisely because the old form can no longer be sustained. The crack in this person happened at a moment they did not choose and could not have predicted. Perhaps they saw a photograph of you living your life without them, not performing happiness for their benefit, not making a point, just genuinely living, genuinely present in your own world, genuinely okay in a way that suggested the door they had been assuming was still open might be slowly, quietly closing. Perhaps it was a mutual friend mentioning your name in a context that confirmed you were not suspended in the same waiting they had been unconsciously counting on. Perhaps it was a quiet Tuesday evening with no particular trigger at all, just the accumulated weight of months of pretending landing all at once in a moment of unbearable clarity. Peterson speaks about the cave you fear to enter, holding the treasure you seek. They have been standing outside that cave for months, standing at the entrance and finding reasons to turn back. It is not the right time. They are not ready. The risk is too great, the outcome too uncertain, the vulnerability required too terrifying to contemplate. But fear sustained long enough does something unexpected. It transforms. It goes from being the thing that keeps you safe to being the thing that is keeping you from your own life. And this person has finally felt that transformation happening inside them, has finally felt the difference between the fear that protects and the fear that imprisons, and has made a choice, quietly and without announcement, that they are no longer willing to live inside the prison. The shadow work has been brutal. This is not a phrase to be used lightly, and it should not be received lightly. Peterson draws heavily from Jung's concept of the shadow, those parts of the self that we have deemed unacceptable, too weak or too needy or too frightening to acknowledge, and have therefore buried beneath layers of compensation and performance, and carefully maintained self-presentation. The false self that gets built over the shadow is always impressive in some way. It has to be. Its entire purpose is to make the buried parts invisible, to give the world and the person themselves something else to look at. This person built an impressive false self, the one who does not need anyone, the one for whom emotional self-sufficiency is not a defense mechanism but a genuine value, a point of pride, a feature rather than a wound dressed up as a feature, the one who leaves before they can be left, who controls through distance rather than submitting to the terrifying uncertainty of genuine intimacy, who would rather be alone inside their own certainty than vulnerable inside someone else's mystery. That self served them for years. It kept them safe in the way that a cage keeps its occupant safe, protected from outside threats at the cost of any real freedom of movement. The shadow work means sitting with the parts of themselves they built that self to conceal, the fear of abandonment that learned early that the safest response to love is to withhold it, because what you withhold cannot be taken from you. The need for connection that was taught to disguise itself as indifference, because need felt dangerous in the environment where they learned what love was. The capacity for genuine feeling that got driven underground by the repeated experience of feelings being used against them, weaponized, treated as vulnerabilities rather than gifts. Sitting with those parts means allowing them to surface without immediately reaching for the suppression mechanisms. It means letting the grief be grief, and the fear be fear, and the longing be longing, without converting any of it into the controlled, manageable, socially acceptable emotions that the false self is licensed to display. It is painful work. It is the most painful work a person can do. And this person has been doing it in the hidden hours, in the privacy of the space where their performance is finally allowed to rest, sitting with the shadow of who they were in this connection, and slowly, painstakingly, learning to integrate what they find there, rather than running from it again. If you want to see how this transformation continues to unfold, pay attention to the signs arriving in the days ahead, because the interior work is reaching the point where it must express itself outwardly. You cannot do this much internal excavation and remain stationary. Pressure builds, truth accumulates. The moment always comes when what has been worked through in private must be offered to the world in public, when the private reckoning must become a visible act. They are preparing for that act right now. It has been taking shape in the quiet of their contemplation, assembled and reassembled through sleepless nights and long unscheduled hours, when the dailiness of their life fell away, and the truth of what they need to do sat before them, unavoidable and clear. They have been rehearsing it, not in the superficial sense of crafting a performance, but in the deeper sense of working out how to say something true in a way that conveys its full weight, that does not minimize what happened between you or what they understand about their own role in how it ended, that does not reach for the comfortable cushion of ambiguity, when what the moment requires is the sharp clarity of complete honesty. What is coming is not a midnight message sent from the blurred edges of loneliness and wine, not a casual like on a photograph designed to test whether the signal is still live without risking anything that would require real courage, not the breadcrumbs of someone who wants to maintain just enough connection to know where the door is while keeping both feet safely outside it. Peterson would recognize those gestures for what they are, the actions of someone who has not yet done the work, who wants the reward of honest connection without paying the price of honest vulnerability. And this person is past that. The work they have done has cost them too much to insult it with a half measure. What is approaching is a complete offering, the whole truth of what they feel and what they understand about where they failed and what they are prepared to do differently. Words that will leave no room for the comfortable ambiguity that protected both of you from having to be fully real with each other. No space for you to wonder whether they are serious or simply bored. No way to interpret what they are saying as anything other than the full, deliberate, considered truth of a person who has finally chosen honesty over self-protection, even knowing what honesty costs. They are going to tell you that they understand now what they did not understand before, that the distance they created was never about you not being enough. You were always enough, you were more than enough, you were the standard against which everything since has been found wanting, but about them not yet being enough for what you were offering. That the intimacy you brought to this connection required a version of them they were not yet willing to become, and that rather than admitting that inadequacy, rather than saying I am afraid, and I do not know how to do this but I want to try, they retreated into the performance of not needing you, that the performance was a lie, that they knew it was a lie even as they were performing it, and that they have been living inside that lie for long enough to understand that no amount of time or achievement or distraction makes it more comfortable to inhabit. They will tell you about the specific ways they failed you, not in the vague, self-exonerating language of someone who wants credit for the apology without paying the full cost of genuine accountability. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I am sorry you felt that way. But in the specific, detailed, fully witnessing language of someone who has looked honestly at what they did and refused to look away until they could name it clearly. Peterson says that genuine apology requires you to actually see the harm you caused, not to explain it or contextualize it or defend the circumstances that produced it, but simply to see it and to say, I see it and I am sorry, and that is what they are preparing to offer. Words they have never said to anyone will leave their mouth. Admissions of need and fear and love that the false self they maintained for so long would have treated as unforgivable weaknesses, because they have learned, through the long and painful process of the last months, that what they called strength was often simply a refusal to be human, and that the refusal cost them the only thing that was ever worth having. The form this gesture takes is less important than its essence, which will be unmistakable. Peterson speaks about the difference between the person who tells you what you want to hear and the person who tells you the truth, regardless of whether it is what you want to hear. You will know which one is standing in front of you by the texture of what they bring. Real offering does not feel smooth and rehearsed and strategically calibrated to produce a specific response in you. It feels rough and uncertain and genuinely vulnerable, the way something feels when a person is not performing it but actually living it, actually standing inside the terror of their own honesty, without a net beneath them. They know they might lose. They know you might have moved to a place they can no longer reach. They know the door they closed with their own hands might not open regardless of how honestly they knock. And they are doing it anyway, because somewhere in the shadow work, somewhere in the long confrontation with who they were and what that cost, they arrived at the understanding that Peterson places at the center of a meaningful life, that the only stories worth living are the ones where you are willing to risk the outcome, where you bring your full self to what matters most to you without guaranteeing in advance that it will work out, where you choose truth over safety even when safety is available and tempting and would cost you nothing except the chance to be fully real. This is what genuine courage looks like, not the absence of fear, which is not courage, but simply the absence of imagination, but the presence of fear and the choice to act anyway, because the cost of not acting has finally, clearly, undeniably exceeded the cost of whatever the action might bring. Real change speaks through consistent action, not through the temporary performance of regret that evaporates once security is re-established in your attention. And you must know the difference. Peterson is unambiguous about this. People reveal themselves over time through repeated choice. Under pressure, not in the single elevated moment of emotional honesty that costs them something once and then allows them to consider the account settled. Anyone can be honest once. Anyone can be vulnerable in the specific moment when the stakes of continued concealment have exceeded the stakes of disclosure. The question is who they are in the ordinary moments after that, in the Tuesday afternoons when nothing dramatic is happening, and the choice to show up fully or to retreat into old patterns presents itself quietly without fanfare, as just another small decision among many. When they return, you will know whether it is real by its texture over time. Real change does not demand immediate forgiveness or press against the pace of your healing to move faster than feels safe. It does not minimize what happened by pointing to its own transformation as though the transformation erases the harm that made it necessary. It does not make elaborate promises about the future while still demonstrating the same essential patterns in the present. It shows up in the small details, in the moments that no one is watching, in the consistency between who they say they are and who they actually prove to be, across days and weeks and months of ordinary life, where the performance would be too exhausting to sustain if it were only a performance. Manipulation wears the mask of change. It has learned to say the right words and produce the right emotional responses and create the right impression of transformation, but it cannot sustain the performance indefinitely, because sustaining a performance requires constant monitoring and constant effort and the inevitable moments of slippage that reveal the machinery beneath the mask. Genuine transformation does not require that monitoring because it is not a performance, it is simply who the person has become. And that difference between the person performing change and the person who has actually changed is felt rather than seen. It arrives through the body before it registers in the mind. Your nervous system knows, your gut knows, and after everything you have been through, you have learned to listen to that knowing rather than talking yourself out of it. Share this message if you are waiting for the real version, not the performance of it, but you are not required to receive what they bring as though your own journey through their absence cost you nothing. You are not obligated to compress the full reality of your healing into a single moment of forgiveness simply because they have finally found the courage that should have been there from the beginning. Peterson is clear on this point, and it is a point that the spiritual language of these conversations often obscures in its rush toward reunion. You have a responsibility to yourself that cannot be dissolved by someone else's belated honesty. The order of your own life matters. The standards you hold matter. The story you tell about what is acceptable treatment and what is not. That story has consequences, not just for this connection, but for every connection that follows, for the signal you send to the world about where your edges are and whether they mean anything. You are allowed to receive their truth and still take time, to honor the realness of their transformation without immediately trusting that transformation with the full weight of your vulnerability again. Trust is rebuilt in actions measured over time, not in a single conversation, however genuinely it is offered. The emotion of the moment and the durability of the change are two different things, and you are wise enough now to require evidence of the second before you commit yourself to the risk of the first. You are allowed to have moved, to have grown during the silence into a version of yourself that is no longer oriented toward what you once shared with the same ache you carried at the beginning of their absence. Healing is not betrayal. Growth is not abandonment. The fact that you have built something real in the space their distance created does not mean that what existed between you was not real. It means you took your own life seriously enough to keep living it, even when living it was painful. It means you chose yourself when they would not choose you, and that choosing produced a version of you that is stronger and clearer, and more certain of your own worth than the person who was waiting at the beginning of this silence. You are allowed to say not yet, to acknowledge the realness of their transformation, while also acknowledging that you need more time, more evidence, more consistency, more proof that the change is durable rather than situational, before you can offer yourself to the risk again with genuine openness, rather than the guarded, protective, partial opening that would not be fair to either of you. You are allowed to say, not ever, to decide that the person you were when you loved them is not the person you are now, and that the growth you have undergone has moved you in directions that no longer align with the connection they are offering, even in its transformed version. Some endings need to remain endings, not because love was not real or transformation was not genuine, but because the chapter has concluded, and the story that comes next requires the space that reopening this door would fill. That is not failure. That is the honest acknowledgement of where you actually are, rather than where you wish you were or where you were told you should be, and you are allowed to choose them again, to meet their courage with your own, to decide that the person who has done this work, who has gone into the cave and confronted what was in there, and come back carrying something true and hard-won, is worth the risk of trying again with eyes open in a way they were not open before. Peterson says that the antidote to chaos is not safety, but meaning, and for some people, the meaning that was present in this connection is irreplaceable enough to be worth the risk of its reconstruction, worth the patience and the difficulty and the inevitable uncertainty of building something new from the ruins of what fell apart. Love that survives rupture and returns honestly is not the same love that existed before the rupture. It cannot be. It has been tested in the way that only loss can test it. It has been stripped of the illusions and the projections and the comfortable assumptions that allowed it to feel certain before the certainty was earned. What remains after that stripping is something more durable and more honest and more genuinely chosen than what preceded it. And that kind of love, when both people are finally standing inside it, with nothing concealed, with full knowledge of what they are choosing and what it has already cost them, and what it might still cost them, that is among the rarest and most valuable things available in a human life. Both choices require courage. This is the thing that the easy spiritual language of inevitability always glosses over, that remaining closed is not the safe option, and opening again is not the risky one. Both carry risk. Both require you to stand in uncertainty and choose deliberately rather than reactively. The courage to open again, to offer yourself to the possibility of being hurt again by the same source that hurt you before, trusting that transformation is real and durability is possible. That is obvious courage. But the courage to stay closed, to honor your own healing as more important than the pull of what was familiar and once beloved, to choose the difficulty of moving forward over the comfort of returning to what you know, that is courage too. Quieter and less celebrated, but no less real. Only you know which courage your moment requires. Only you have access to the full truth of what your interior life has been through in these months and what it is telling you now. Peterson's deepest conviction is that the answers you need are already inside you, written in the body's responses and the gut's knowing, and the quiet voice that speaks in the early morning before the noise of the day has had a chance to drown it out. Your only task is to have the courage to hear that voice clearly, and to trust what it tells you, over the louder voices of fear and longing and social pressure, and the story that others are writing about what you should do and who you should be. Whatever you choose will be the right choice, not because all choices are equal or because outcomes do not matter, but because a choice made from genuine self-knowledge and honest self-accountability is always more right than one made from fear or from the desire to be what someone else needs you to be in this moment. You have done your own work. You have your own clarity. And that clarity, however complicated and contradictory it might feel, is the most reliable guide you have. This is not distant. It is not the vague promise of someday that spiritual content uses to keep you watching, to sustain the hope that makes you return. This is close in the way that something feels close when it has been moving toward you for a long time and has finally reached the distance where you can feel the displacement of air. The energy that has been building is approaching its threshold, and when it crosses that threshold, when it translates from invisible pressure into visible action, you will feel the difference immediately. Not because you were waiting for it, though perhaps you were, but because real truth arriving from a person who has genuinely earned their way to it has a quality that is unmistakable. It does not announce itself with drama. It arrives with a quietness that is somehow louder than anything that has come before. Watch for the signs in the coming days, not the magical signs of repeating numbers and meaningful songs, though these may come too, but the human signs, the message that arrives with a weight and a specificity that could not have been casually composed. The call where you hear something in the voice you have not heard before. The presence that shows up with a stillness it did not have when it left. A groundedness that can only come from someone who has stopped running and chosen deliberately to stand in one place. They are preparing to be brave, and the preparation is almost complete. And what comes next will require you to meet it with the full truth of who you are now. Not the version of you who loved them at the beginning. Not the version of you who was hurt when they left, but the version of you who survived the absence and grew through it and arrived here, in this moment, knowing yourself in a way you did not know yourself before. That version of you is ready for whatever comes. That version of you will know exactly what to do when the moment arrives. Peterson says that the way to transform the future is to tell the truth in the present with as much precision and as much courage as you can bring to bear. That is what they are preparing to do, and it is what you will be capable of doing in response. The storm is about to break, and when it does, you will not be caught unprepared, because you have been doing your own work too, and the person who has come through that work is someone who can be trusted, by themselves, above all, to stand fully in whatever this moment requires, and to meet it without flinching, without performing, and without pretending. To be anything other than exactly, precisely, courageously who they are. That is not nothing. In a world that rewards performance over truth and safety over meaning, the willingness to stand in your full reality and face what comes, that is, as Peterson would say, everything,